It all begins when the protagonist's father arranges a marriage for him with the sovereign Valdrova, firmly stating he is certain that Ferda Rosnova knows very well what this decision means. For Ferda, receiving the news of that engagement was like living a terrible nightmare. After all, she was a tyrant dragon, and for any noble, those words were equivalent to receiving a final sentence with only two choices: refuse the deal and be rejected, or accept destiny and end up destroyed. Deep down, however, Ferda just wanted to feel like part of that family and be accepted by them. Long before all of this happened, Ferda tried to train tirelessly. Being the third son of a concubine and born with fragile health, the odds were stacked against him. The servants who saw him training commented that it was useless, as he had not evolved in years and fought without any talent. Although no one stayed by his side, Ferda endured all the trials. He believed that if he kept trying, one day he would be recognized. Whenever he looked at the window and saw his father watching him with what seemed like a smile, he gained the strength to continue, until an incident changed everything. Sword in hand, one of his brothers asked mocking, "Ferda, I heard an interesting rumor lately. Did you really start night training? It seems you are mistaken about something. You don't even have the right to try. Not with those unusual blue eyes of yours." Fallen and overcome on the ground, Ferda looked toward the window seeking support, but reality was cruel. His father simply turned his back and walked away, showing that he did not care about him at all. In that instant, Ferda realized the truth. Everyone there had already turned their backs on him a long time ago. Now, in the present, Ferda gathers all his courage and informs his father that he has decided to leave the clan. The man merely stares at him with a completely cold look. Without showing any reaction or affection, he coldly agrees, and, in a short time, Ferda finds himself outside the gates of the mansion, severed from the bloodline and without the Rosnova surname. Alone outside, Ferda looks at his own calloused hands and begins to tremble with indignation, remembering that his father knew perfectly well how hard he had tried. Consumed by a dark determination, his eyes glow with a burning desire for a reckoning. He swears to himself that, under no circumstances, will he ever forgive his father for what he did. In that instant, a mysterious red magic circle appears around him. Reacting to all those intense emotions, he promises to make his father bitterly regret discarding him. On that very day, Ferda awakened as a mage. Because he only awakened magic at 18 years old, he began to be pestered by the other apprentices. Fallen on the ground, he heard the others mocking him, saying he was too old to want to be a mage. They laughed, asking if he had the mental capacity to understand the arcanist art, and stating that it would take decades just to assimilate the basic principles. Ferda knew that every mage uses their inner strength as fuel. Ignoring the taunts, he muttered that he didn't care about any of that. Suddenly, his body began to emanate a dark aura. The boys were terrified upon realizing it was a red circle. Coldly, Ferda revealed that he didn't care about what they said, as his mana was fueled by resentment and the desire for a reckoning. With all that dark energy accumulated, he caused an overwhelming explosion at the site, leaving the aggressors fallen on the ground. Ferda then realized that the more he disdained someone, the more powerful his magical power became. Driven by his implacable determination, he reached the sixth magic circle. The only place left to return to was his former home, the Rosnova clan. That was his sole target. Using his new powers, he made the servants who used to humiliate him face the consequences of their actions. Next, Ferda caused his two older brothers to enter into severe conflict, watching closely as the two fought until complete ruin. Finally, he confronted his own father, the man for whom he held the greatest grudge, who now desperately begged for an end to that situation. Ferda commanded his father to look closely at the decline of the proud Rosnova family that he himself had built. The man completely lost his mind seeing that desolate scenario unfold before his eyes. With that, everything connected to the Rosnova family disappeared from the map. However, the completed mission still didn't seem enough to calm his heart. His restlessness and his fury never cooled, spreading across the entire continent. In response, several powerful and influential warriors joined together to try to stop him at all costs. They surrounded him and declared him the continent's greatest adversary, promising to bring him to judgment. But he broke through the siege once more and reached the 8th magic circle, the highest level a human being could attain, placing the entire kingdom under his domain. Ferda became an archmage. Knowing that many still contested him and would come after him in the future, he realized he needed to reach the 9th circle, the domain of a demigod, to obtain absolute power and overcome anyone who stood in his way. Researching ancient books, he finally found the final ingredient needed to get there. As he looked at the page of the book, he questioned whether that was just a sick joke of fate. The last ingredient he needed so much was the heart of the red dragon, the sovereign Valdrova. This caused him to head to the dragon's lair where she used to live isolated from humans. She was severely weakened on the ground and muttered, "Fate is truly ironic. To think that the one who was to be my fiancé would come to put an end to my journey." A devastating confrontation had just taken place between the two. One of her horns was broken. Ferda, heavily injured, shouted, "You should surrender in silence before me, Tyrant Valdrova." Hearing this, she replied, "I know very well that they call me a tyrant, but tell me, why? I have never shown myself, not even before your birth. I remained isolated here far from the human world. What reason drives you to harbor such hostility?" This made him even more indignant. He raged, "You are the root of all my misery. Your demand to seek a fiancé caused me to be expelled from my family." Valdrova asked if the fault was truly hers. Consumed by deep bitterness, he shouted, "Yes, a legendary creature demanding a human companion. That imposition alone is your mistake. This choice of yours made me miserable. Do you even know that?" Those words made her tremble slightly, and her voice sounded as if she were on the verge of tears. Ferda hesitated for a second, not understanding that reaction. However, he ignored the feeling. Thanks to that pause, he gained enough time to accumulate mana and fire the decisive attack. The dragon then raised her claw, whispering that she finally understood. Next, she made a sudden movement. Frightened, Ferda tried to defend himself using his magic barrier. An overwhelming impact hit the area and a red trickle began to drip down Ferda's face. To his surprise, however, that fluid belonged to the dragon herself, who had begun to pierce her own chest with her claws. Ferda is completely horrified and confused, not understanding why she is hurting herself that way. The dragon then asks if his magic really needed a dragon's heart to evolve. Desperate, he realizes she intends to destroy her own life source and screams for her to stop immediately. Little by little, the creature moves forward with her act. Ferda races against time to stop her, as that element is his only chance to expand his powers. He fires a spell to try to restrain her, hitting the gigantic dragon's head, which sways and takes steps backward. Ferda panics as he notices her movements continue toward her own chest. When the dragon finally collapses onto the ground, Ferda anxiously wonders what could have happened to such a valuable item. He focuses his vision and notices the reflection of an intense golden glow in his own eyes. To his relief, the precious dragon's heart remains perfectly intact before him. In a serene voice, the dragon tells him to take the heart, leaving Ferda bewildered by that gesture. He mutters, "I don't understand you, Valdrova. Why go so far? If you wanted to counterattack, you could have easily ended my life by now." With a trembling tone of voice, she replies, "I know. It is simply because I was the cause of your misery. For a long time, I hated myself. I despised the violent nature that ran through my veins and this uncontrolled urge to cause destruction. I couldn't contain myself. My very existence struck fear into people. If I were gone, everything would be resolved. Even so, I clung to life, wishing to find happiness. My foolish dream brought trouble to so many people." In tears, she whispers her final words, "Since I caused unhappiness to everyone, I ask that at least you find happiness because of me. This is the last thing I can do for you." With that, the gigantic creature finally goes dark, falling lifeless onto the dark ground. Ferda feels a strange tightness in his chest and wonders what kind of feeling that was. He grows deeply irritated that such a desired achievement leaves such a bitter taste. Inside, he cries out in frustration, thinking that the dragon tried to destabilize his mind until her final breath. Trying to focus on his main goal, Ferda remembers that the path to the 9th circle is right in front of him. He holds up the gleaming heart to finally attain absolute power. Ferda believes that if he absorbs the essence of the ancient dragon, he will finally be able to surpass the limits of humanity itself and be reborn in this world as a powerful and feared demigod. A gigantic explosion of light and dust overwhelmingly consumes the entire area. Suddenly, the scenery changes completely and he finds himself floating in the middle of a vast, dark void. Ferda wonders what is happening, since he had absorbed the element perfectly, but the feeling at the moment is like sinking deeper and deeper into a bottomless abyss. He begins to question whether that endless fall is merely a side effect of the absorption. In that instant, an overwhelming and uncontrollable wave of someone else's feelings floods his mind. A strong impact of magic energy strikes his head directly in the midst of the darkness. With that, Ferda realizes in shock that those memories and feelings actually belong to Valdrova. He finally manages to see the truth and understand what was going on in that creature's mind. He sees an ancient, deep despair that makes his own problems seem insignificant. She was a beautiful, lonely soul who was still trying to embrace the world. Ferda realizes that all the indignation and resentment that fueled his journey to take her life were painfully pathetic. In tears, he asks himself what he has just done. He questions what he really wanted with such intensity. Was it to become a great mage, to have a reckoning, or to become a demigod? At that moment, he remembers when he was just a little child, drawing alone at his desk, a drawing of a happy and united family. He realized that the answer to his question had always been an absolute no. He just wanted to build a simple family and live in peace. Remembering Valdrova's human form with deep sadness, he wonders if she shared the exact same simple dream as his. Now he realizes that his entire pursuit of power and a reckoning made no sense at all. The dragon was already gone by his own hands, making his great achievement completely empty. Sincere tears filled with regret begin to stream down his face. He remembers that the only magic a mage of the ninth circle can cast is the wish spell. Even thinking that everything would be in vain, Ferda decides to invoke the supreme magic at the center of that glowing circle. Suddenly, he hears a familiar voice calling his name and opens his eyes in surprise. Looking around, he realizes he is back in the luxurious office of his family's mansion. Standing before him was his father, reprimanding him for being distracted while they were talking. Ferda remembers that this man had lost his mind before passing away in the future and begins to suspect exactly which day this was. His father repeats the exact sentence, saying that his engagement to the sovereign Valdrova had already been decided. The man continues, stating he is certain Ferda knows very well what this decision means, and warns that if he refuses the deal, he will be severed from the Rosnova family. Ferda takes a step forward and realizes he truly managed to travel back in time. He interrupts his father resolutely and says with extreme firmness that he understands everything perfectly. Ferda swears he will not run away this time, and formally announces that he accepts the engagement to the sovereign Valdrova. We are taken to Hurin Rosnova. He is extremely shocked to hear that his brother accepted the engagement and asks the servant, "Are you sure you heard correctly?" He is weak enough to beg for his life, but he is not the type to walk to his own demise of his own free will. What on earth is he doing? The butler explains that Ferda is due to leave soon, but he dismissed all the servants and locked himself in his own room. Hurin smiles maliciously and decides to pay a visit to mock his younger brother's desperate expression. Meanwhile, in the room, Ferda was calmly getting dressed in front of the mirror. Suddenly, Hurin kicks open the door and yells, "Ferda, you scoundrel, why haven't you left yet?" However, upon looking inside the room, the older brother is bewildered. He is startled to see Ferda dressing with complete composure, as he thought he would see him crying and making a scene for not wanting to go. Ferda stares at him coldly and questions his brother's lack of manners for invading the room without knocking. Hurin is surprised to see Ferda dressing himself. The young man explains that he dismissed the servants to get used to not having help. Hurin grows suspicious of that drastic change and asks if he truly understands the meaning of that deal. Ferda replies with absolute calm that he knows very well. It basically means being expelled from the clan. Hurin laughs mockingly and says that, in reality, this engagement is a final sentence, asking if he knows why the position of fiancé was always vacant. Ferda answers that he knows perfectly well. Hurin continues, telling him that in the past, Valdrova's first fiancé was the third prince of the empire, a perfect man with a brilliant intellect, striking appearance, and immense popularity. He even gave up his claims to the throne to become the companion of the fearsome dragon. However, in less than a day after his arrival, He was defeated and pitilessly driven out. And yet do you really think you can face an engagement that even the third prince couldn't endure? Well, I suppose no one can stop a fool who wants to walk straight into the claws of a dragon. Don't even think about disobeying the family and running away. If you do that, I will resolve your fate myself before Valdrova even gets the chance. Ferda looks at him with disdain and replies, "Brother, you should worry about controlling your own behavior. Everyone knows the disrespectful way you look at our older brother's wife." That provocation hit a nerve, and Huron tried to charge at him in an impulse of extreme indignation. The butler had to forcefully restrain him, while Ferda remarked mockingly that his brother would have to hold back the urge to attack. Smiling, he added that his face was far too valuable at that moment to allow any mark, reminding him that the journey to the dragon's territory would be long. Ferda calmly bade farewell and headed to the carriage. The middle-aged butler began to cry intensely into a handkerchief during the young man's departure, saying through tears that it had been an absolute honor to serve the young master over all those years. Ferda knew that was a lie, and after all, if it were a genuine honor, he would not have put harmful substances in his meal when he was still a child. Ferda remembered that, in his childhood, he believed he was naturally weak, unaware that even the servants acted as his opponents. Just by recalling that dark period, he felt a deep disgust and a strong urge to settle the score right then and there with the butler. However, he merely placed his hand on the guy's shoulder and thanked him for his dedication over so much time, commenting cinematically that it must not have been easy to put up with him for years. The statement left the butler visibly tense. Ferda asked him to take good care of his former family during his absence, and finally stepped into the carriage. Settled inside, he realized that his mind was at peace. Perhaps because he had already settled accounts with everyone in another life, he leaned his head against the window and recalled the past. The magic he used before acted as an overwhelming impulse, exciting at first but becoming completely uncontrollable as his tolerance grew. When he let himself be carried away by it, everything felt intense and frenetic. He remembered the moment Valdrova offered her own essence in her final moments. Faced with those memories, he decided he didn't want to return to that routine. He sighed and muttered to himself, "This tranquility is actually nice for a change. Does this mean I will never trigger my awakening as a mage again?" Suddenly, the journey came to an end, and the driver called out in a visibly frightened tone, warning that they had finally arrived. A wooden sign amidst the vegetation warned that the territory of the sovereign began there, and that entry was strictly forbidden. Ferda stepped down from the carriage and sat calmly on his suitcase to await the guide. The driver subtly departed in a hurry, shouting from a distance that he hoped the young master managed to stay safe and healthy. It seemed Ferda had alerted him to the dragon's imminent presence, which was why the man had rushed off. Ferda thought it was good not to be watched, but calculated that he would need to use simple fourth circle spells should any wild beasts appear. In that instant, the wind blew more intensely, kicking up some leaves and catching the young man's attention. Fixing his gaze on the forest, he noticed the mysterious silhouette of a girl hidden among the vegetation. The young girl, wearing a maid uniform, approached and formally introduced herself as Ruri, loyal servant of the sovereign Valdrova. She asked if he was the young master Ferda Rosnova, and he calmly confirmed his identity. Ruri made a gesture with her hand, indicating that she would accompany and guide him along the path toward the castle. As they walked, Ferda reflected in silence that the population of the Arkan Empire was dazzled by its own power, believing itself to be invincible. In reality, however, that strength was far from being absolute. The eastern region of the continent, the land of creatures, was a calamity that humanity could never contain on its own. And yet, the one holding back the advance of the beasts and governing the front line was none other than the Red Dragon, Valdrova. She had built the sole line of defense against the creatures, and still, the population called her a demonic dragon. Her bad reputation was completely unfair, considering everything she accomplished. Malicious rumors were spread saying that she was secretly creating an army of beasts, though no one had the courage to say a single word to her face. At that moment, a group of hungry wolves stealthily approached. Ferda moved his head quickly to the side just in time to see a projectile graze past him, scaring the beasts away. The young man had the distinct feeling that the servant had aimed on purpose, trying to cause a supposed accident. Ruri replied with indifference, "You have nothing to worry about. As long as you are with me, these beasts will not dare to attack." The young man merely thanked her and asked how much longer they would be walking. She revealed that it would take about 2 hours. Curious, he inquired how she had gotten there, to which she explained that if she were alone, 10 seconds would be enough to fly across. Hearing this, Ferda was impressed, thinking in silence, "You really are no ordinary maid. A servant carrying elemental blood, a direct descendant with innate strength, magic, besides hidden horns and tail. She is a high-level servant, completely different from the others." Now leaning on a wooden cane, Ferda suggested that she fly him to the castle. She questioned whether that wouldn't require her to carry him. He asked her not to worry, assuring her that he could handle the flight. However, she refused bluntly, stating that she simply didn't want to do that. Ferda remained there, trembling with fatigue and bewildered by the situation. He then suggested resting for a bit, but she instructed him to keep walking, as her lady was already awaiting him. Ferda made a discouraged expression, realizing he would have to face the entire walk along that exhausting path, concluding that this commitment would be no easy task. After walking for a long stretch, the maid finally knocked on the enormous door of the territory's castle. She announced in a clear, loud voice to her lady that the fiancé had just arrived at the location. Ferda felt an immense pressure coming from inside, impressed by the sovereign's overwhelming presence. Ruri asked him to wait there while she went inside to receive the message, but the young man suggested talking face to face. The maid stared at him severely, questioning whether someone of his position thought he had the right to see the Duchess in person. The young man immediately checked his composure. Shortly after, she returned outside announcing that she would deliver Duchess Valdrova's official message. Adjusting her tone of voice, she declared, "To you who have come for the engagement by order of the Arkan Empire, I praise your determination in reaching this place, even aware of my rigid nature. However, I have no interest in a forced agreement. Return from whence you came." Hearing that, he thought in silence, "I came from so far as a fiancé, and she wants to send me back. In my past life, I would have gladly accepted and run away, but now I am different." Ferda bowed with respect and declared with firmness that he had no intention whatsoever of turning back, genuinely desiring to proceed with the commitment. Ruri was completely surprised by the reaction. Seeing her hesitation, Ferda asked if she would not take his answer to her lady. The maid reluctantly accepted. Moments later, Ruri reappeared at the spot, dropping with impact a massive, heavy sack filled with gold coins. She began to transmit Valdrova's new response. "I greatly appreciate your resolve in coming of your own accord. If returning is difficult for you, I grant you this fortune. Therefore leave this place and build a new life elsewhere." Ferda then answered with conviction, "I have no interest in power or riches. My sole objective is my commitment to you, Sovereign Valdrova." Hearing all that persistence from the young man, Ruri closed her eyes and let out a deep sigh of impatience. Taken by a sudden reaction, she clenched her fist tightly and threw a punch in the air. Pointing her finger at Ferda, she said harshly, "I will not waste my words. Leave this place immediately." Ferda commented that the response seemed far too short to have come from the Duchess. The maid then confessed that those words were her own. Horns emerged from her head and her nails grew into sharp claws as she made a direct demand. Ruri released her impressive aura, finally revealing her immense reptilian tail. Ferda tries to protect himself against the terrible gust of wind. Realizing that it is the terrifying dragon pressure, he falls to his knees on the ground while Ruri rages, saying she knows very well that mortals like him are merely opportunists who do not care about Lady Valdrova, driven solely by power and ambition. Hearing this, Ferda asks if that was the reason the third prince ended up defeated. Ruri confirms, saying that his mind was full of plans to use the engagement and take advantage of Lady Valdrova, calling him a shameless fool for believing he could hide such intentions. The maid takes a firm step forward and pins him to the ground. Staring into his eyes, she mutters coldly, "Trying to deceive my lady. Do you wish to share the same pitiful end as the third prince?" However, even in a delicate situation, Ferda merely displays a subtle, confident smile. Ruri is surprised as the young man begins to make a sincere oath, declaring that there is no lie in his words. He guarantees that he was not forced by anyone, nor is he seeking profit or personal advantage. He remembers that in his other life, the dragon gave her own essence to save a selfish man like him. Ferda promises that this time, he will remain steadfast by her side, declaring in a clear, loud voice that he came to be her companion. He adds that, since they will soon be together, the lady herself should speak directly to him instead of using an intermediary. The maid's hand trembles before that stance, finding the young man's audacity completely insolent. She charges toward him, ready to restrain him, furiously demanding that he stop talking nonsense. Suddenly, Ruri freezes millimeters away from Ferda, Pulling back her attack, she takes a few steps backward and excuses herself for a moment, receiving Ferda's calm agreement. Inside the castle, the maid faithfully transmits to her lady the bold words spoken by the young man. Bowing respectfully on the floor, she concludes that that was exactly what the young man declared. We then see Valdrova's dragon form. The maid maintains her look of deep admiration for her lady. Valdrova then shifts into her human form and asks, surprised, if the young man really said all that. Curious about such audacity, the red-haired duchess confesses that she wishes to discover what kind of person he truly is. Rory comments that he is extremely weak, looking as if he would faint from fatigue just from the walking route to the castle. The maid says with disdain that he is very ugly and suggests throwing him out immediately, but receives a scolding tone from her lady. Rory awkwardly apologizes and confesses that the young man is, in fact, quite attractive and the type who has likely won over many hearts. But the Duchess warns that that was not her question. Letting out a long sigh of defeat, the maid finally admits the truth. The young man seems to be someone truly out of the ordinary. She explains with gravity that, being a servant of elemental lineage, it is extremely easy to terrorize any ordinary mortal. However, Ferda did not show the slightest sign of fear, even after she released her overwhelming presence. Because of that, she believes the young man will be perfectly capable of looking directly into the Duchess's own eyes. Suddenly, Valdrova lets out a light and relaxed laugh, catching the maid completely by surprise. The Duchess comments with a satisfied smile that she found the young man's attitude excellent, feeling very pleased to know that there is finally a human capable of facing her gaze. She rejoices upon realizing that they will finally be able to talk and look at each other in a completely normal way. Rory repeats the word, visibly astonished. Finding her lady's wish to act normally very strange, the Duchess confirms with affection, while the maid merely accepts the orders in absolute silence. Rory returns outside and informs Ferda that her lady has indeed decided to move forward with the engagement. Next, she states that she will guide him and show the way to the guest room where he will be staying. Upon entering the luxurious room, Ferda notes with surprise that the place is much cleaner and better maintained than he had imagined. He asks who takes care of the cleaning there, and she answers with pride that she is the sole person responsible for it. She then treats the young man sharply as just a visitor. Ferda finds it strange to be called that, but she retorts saying that since the marriage has not yet taken place, he is merely a guest. He mentally compares her to a protective guard dog and decides to ask when the engagement ceremony will finally take place. Rory explains that the event will be simple and discreet, taking place in 1 month at the Dragon Shrine itself. Ferda becomes quite reflective upon realizing he has a 1-month deadline until the official date of the commitment. The maid stares at him with crossed arms, maintaining her completely suspicious and vigilant stance. She warns him that no one is going to hand the engagement to him on a silver platter, and that this time frame will serve for him to prove his true worth. Pointing her finger, Rory demands that he manage to earn a reputation worthy of being the companion of such a grand being within 30 days. Ferda sighs tiredly at the demand upon hearing that he will need to prove he possesses the qualifications to be her fiancé. He asks if that requirement is a wish of the Duchess, but Rory confesses it was her own personal decision. She explains that her lady is far too kind and forgives everything, but that she herself does not accept just anyone living there. Rory demands that, even with a fragile body, Ferda managed to demonstrate in a practical way that he possesses true potential. She warns that if he fails the challenge, he will never be recognized as a worthy companion to the sovereign. Ferda sighs and falls deep in thought. He feels satisfied that his future wife has such a loyal servant by her side. Even if Rory dislikes him, she puts her lady first, pointing out exactly what is expected of Valdrova's companion. Even so, he doesn't understand why someone so loyal was nowhere to be found on the day he took Valdrova's life in the past. At any rate, he accepts the challenge and ironically asks if he needs to go as far as becoming an emperor, but she replies that it is enough not to be looked down upon by other rulers. Hearing this, he thinks in silence, "You make it sound so easy." You're asking me to show potential that satisfies even more than an emperor. He then sighs and accepts her challenge. Ruri stares at him, thoroughly irritated, unable to understand why the human is so calm and relaxed. She asks sharply if he thinks he will easily deal with legendary beings or if he has some mental issue, but he calmly denies it. Ferda asks her not to worry, guaranteeing that he will show his true capability in just 1 month. Ruri observes him with suspicion, wondering where all that immense confidence displayed by the young man came from. Later, night fell over the sovereign's immense castle, with the full moon shining in the dark sky. Ferda walks through his room while thinking in silence. I need to prove my potential. It is true that right now I have no power, but on this continent a mage is a rare existence, and among them, the experience of having reached the 9th circle is something unique to me. If my memories of that time remain, it is entirely possible. For an arcanist, the first circle is the most critical, as it is the crossroads that decides the nature of your mana circuit. A blue circle is formed through calm meditation. It is a slow path, but because of its stability, it is the choice of most mages. On the other hand, the red circle is born from volatile emotions. It grants a rapid increase in power, but the person is easily consumed by their own feelings, making it easy to lose one's sanity. In my past life, I became a great arcanist driven solely by resentment. Following the trail I've already walked would make me grow strong much faster. However, this time, I will do things differently. To ensure I remain unwavering, I need to begin my training right now. A week passes at the castle. Ferda sits on the floor of his room in a lotus position to try to meditate. He focuses deeply and begins to manifest a small, bluish, magical energy between his hands. With a tired sigh, he watches the energy dissipate and realizes he failed once again in his attempt. He reflects that structuring a blue circle usually takes about 3 years, but he thought he could speed up the process by preserving his memories from before traveling back in time. He knows that only 3 weeks remain. At that instant, Ferda is interrupted by Ruri, who enters the room asking if he is preparing himself. He confirms that he is trying, but the maid sets his meal on the table and comments that nothing seems to have changed about him. Ferda eats calmly and says that things will work out if he keeps trying, leaving the girl silent and visibly irritated. While eating, Ferda admits to himself that he has made no progress and will need a different approach. Suddenly, a violent tremor shakes the entire room, catching him completely by surprise. Ferda asks what that vibration is, and Ruri explains that her lady is fighting creatures at that very moment. Ferda finds the confrontation curious, but Ruri clarifies that she is personally eliminating the beasts emerging from the eastern border region. At that, Ferda looks thoughtful and mutters Valdrova's name. He stands up firmly and informs the maid that he wishes to see that battle with his own eyes. Ruri emphatically advises against the idea, making him question the reason why he cannot go there. She explains with gravity that the mind of an ordinary mortal could never withstand the sight of such a battle, scoffing at him next. Unless you want to go through humiliation before the engagement ceremony, you had better stay here. However, Ferda places his hand firmly on the table and rejects the advice to stay behind. He declares that witnessing the fight is the duty of the one who will be her companion, insisting on watching everything up close. Faced with his obstinacy, Ruri spreads her wings and flies quickly through the skies, carrying Ferda with her. In a matter of seconds, they land on a grassy area, and the maid announces that they have finally arrived at the location. Ferda falls to his knees on the ground, feeling nauseous from the absurd speed of the journey, which felt almost like teleportation. With the stomach turned upside down, he complains about the discomfort, but the maid commands him to focus his attention on the true objective, ordering him to stand up and look straight ahead once and for all. The two observe from atop a cliff, where a dense, dark purple mist covers the region below. Fixing his gaze toward the chaos, Ferda anxiously wonders if that is where Valdrova is battling. Several creatures try to restrain her, but in the next second she breaks free from them all as flames burst forth on all sides. 2 massive serpents hiss against her, but Valdrova grabs them by the neck and easily subjugates her opponents. Next, a blazing energy rapidly accumulates in her throat, and she fires a devastating blast of fire that consumes everything in its path at the bottom of the valley. The heat wave and strong winds reach the top of the cliff, but Ruri remains steadfast and serene amidst the impact happening below. Valdrova lets out an extremely deafening and imposing roar. The sonic impact of the roar spreads like an overwhelming shock wave across the entire valley. Feeling the crushing pressure of that creature, Ferda breaks into a cold sweat and begins to tremble before such power. He falls to his knees on the ground, awestruck by the absurd amount of strength his future companion possesses. The intimidating aura of the dragon's roar deeply affects the mind of any mortal who hears it up close. Trembling and with a hand on his chest, Ferda tries to catch his breath as Ruri asks if he has finally understood the situation. Coldly, she states how disproportionate it is for a mere human to try to unite with a being as powerful as a dragon. Ruri points to the gigantic creature and declares that that is the true form of the one who will be Ferda's future companion. Noticing the young man's hand on the ground, the maid realizes that he is trembling considerably under all that pressure. She thinks to herself that the young man is reacting exactly as she expected, justifying why she had warned him earlier. Returning to her human form, Ruri explains, in the blood of a red dragon dwells what humans call the essence of the ancient dragon, an innate urge geared toward combat that cannot coexist without causing great impacts all around. It is an intrinsic nature, regardless of personality. You will feel pressured every single day. Determination alone will never be enough. Have you finally understood what it means to be a dragon's companion? A human and a dragon can never be united. Ruri thinks in silence. With this, my lady will soon realize reality as well. Dreaming of living alongside a human is in vain. However, Ferda raises his head with a smile on his face and mutters that all of it was truly magnificent, catching the maid by surprise. Ruri is astonished to realize that, instead of terror, that man stared at the dragon with pure admiration and fascination. She steps back a few paces, intrigued, wondering if the human has some issue with his sanity. Later that night, at the castle, Ferda was lying in his bed, quite sore from the physical toll of the day. His body was completely exhausted from being hit by the dragon's pressure and the overwhelming roar. It was a true miracle that his mind remained intact. But at that rate, he would lose a whole day instead of structuring his magic circuit. He then begins to question why he had decided to watch that risky combat in the first place. Remembering in detail all the impressive scenes he had witnessed in the valley during the day, he admits it was frightening beyond measure. But he wanted to keep watching. Her holding the line at the edge of the eastern world, facing and containing those creatures, all that just to protect what she loves. The path of a noble guardian who chose a life of trials. How magnificent that was. And to think that the two of them would be united. In that instant, a strong red energy begins to concentrate between his hands, making him realize it is the red circle. He enters a state of apprehension, trying to contain the energy, for he knows he cannot repeat the same mistakes of the past and needs to reject that volatile power. However, looking closer at the flow of that reddish mana, he becomes intrigued by what he is seeing inside it. The image of the imposing warrior resurfaces with full force in his thoughts. Ferda feels his chest pulse as he focuses his mind on the striking image of Valdrova. He notices that the more he remembers her battle, the more his circuits are purified with a feeling that has no relation whatsoever to resentment or a desire for revenge. Sitting in meditation upon the energy, he tries to identify this mysterious emotion before it completely dissipates. Concentrating entirely on this feeling, he begins to compress and rapidly spin the magical energy between his hands. Ferda channels all his willpower with the goal of manifesting a single powerful magic circle. He successfully creates the red circle and smiles upon noticing that, this time, the energy is completely different from before. With a firm gaze, he assures himself that the mistakes of the past will never repeat themselves in this new life. The next day, Ruri enters the room and her jaw drops, asking if he truly managed to activate his circuits in a single night. Ferda praises her perception, while the maid insists on knowing how he accomplished a feat that would normally be impossible. He confidently comments that he succeeded because he is not an ordinary person, and asks what she thought of his rapid progress. Ruri reluctantly admits that he met the initial qualifications. However, Ferda acknowledges that he still has a long journey ahead. After finishing his meal and wiping his mouth, he sets aside his napkin and asks if there is anywhere nearby where he can train. The scene then shifts to a field with training targets. Ruri appears holding a broom and proudly announces that she has prepared the entire training area exactly as he had requested. Impressed, Ferda claps his hands and praises the maid's efficiency for organizing everything by herself in just half a day's work. The maid finds the situation strange and comments, "I can't believe all you asked for was a simple training target instead of expensive magic tools. What exactly do you plan to practice?" He explains that he is training to control his mana efficiently, because without proper control, he will end up wasting energy unnecessarily. The explanation leaves her confused. He then asks, "Is it different for dragons?" She confirms with pride, "For us, that sounds like saying you need practice just to breathe." If other dragon descendants heard this, they would say, "You are primitive." Ferda asks if his actions seem primitive to her. Ruri nods her head, proud to also be of elemental bloodline. Ferda feels slightly annoyed that a natural genius like her could never comprehend human effort. He then turns around and begins to walk away. Ruri asks if she can watch him train, and he, in a subtly irritated tone, replies that she can watch him breathe if she likes. Once he reaches a proper distance, Ferda stops and concentrates. In silence, he reflects. The foundation of mana control is stability. That is the path of the blue circle, but my circle is the red one. I need to release my emotions while keeping them under absolute control. Only when I overcome this contradiction will true power forge its path. In my past life, it took me a year to draw mana from that turbulent torrent, and another year to condense it into a sphere. The mana bullet I forged with so much sweat in the past now takes only 2 minutes to create. Ruri watches in absolute astonishment as Ferda, without the slightest effort, creates a perfectly stable sphere of crimson mana on his very first attempt. Before she could even process what she had just seen, he calmly manifests 3 more floating spheres around his hand. With precise control, Ferda directs the projectiles against the training target. The crimson spheres advance at incredible speed, cutting through the air before crashing directly against the structure. The target is completely disintegrated in a single devastating impact. Satisfied with the result, Ferda mutters to himself that his skills have not rusted. Meanwhile, Ruri remains in silence, carefully analyzing the impeccable demonstration she had just witnessed. Sometime later, Ruri meets with Valdrova inside a cave and reports everything she observed about Ferda's unexpectedly fast awakening as an arcanist. Since Valdrova was not familiar with the standards of human magic, she asks how impressive that feat really was. Ruri replies with hesitation. He was flawless without making a single mistake from the beginning, which actually makes him highly suspicious and dangerous. Valdrova questions the reason, and Ruri, with her usual proud and elusive tone, retorts saying that no human would reach that level without failing a single time, so he must be hiding something. Perhaps he is just an eccentric fellow. Valdrova is amused to realize that the fact Ruri acknowledges a human to this extent is already something unprecedented, concluding that he must be a truly remarkable man, as he is observed. Ruri reluctantly admits that he has his worth. Valdrova then decides that she wants to believe in the sincerity that Ferda has consistently shown her. Ruri, however, cannot forget how much humans had already hurt her beloved lady in the past. Determined to protect Valdrova from experiencing that pain again, the maid decides to uncover Ferda's true intentions. With this goal in mind, Ruri proposes giving Ferda an important mission, capable of revealing his true character. Intrigued by the suggestion, Valdrova asks what kind of task she has in mind. We are taken to the hall of the Eastern Border Coalition. The local nobles gather, surprised by the sovereign's sudden convocation of that assembly. Some lords complain about the meeting amidst the constant danger of the border creatures, but soon begin commenting on the imminent arrival of her new companion. One of them is shocked to learn that someone had the audacity to accept that proposal and asks who the fool could be. A noble replies that the fiancé is the third young master of the Rosnova family. Hearing this, the lords mock, saying that an 18-year-old youth is acting as if he were a king just because he has the Duchess's backing. They comment that he is a disappointment who doesn't even know how to wield a sword. The others are surprised by the information. He comes from the Rosnova family, the guardians of the empire, yet is inferior to an ordinary soldier. Next, Count Ulvera, sitting at the center, takes the floor. Well, how long could he possibly last? There's nothing to worry about. The sovereign will likely dismiss this fiancé as well. The other nobles agree and end the discussion. At that instant, Ferda enters the hall wearing an elegant red noble outfit, while Ruri announces, "Arrival of Lord Ferda Rosnova." We then see a brief moment from the past. Ferda was reading calmly in the library and asked if he really needed to meet with the lords. Ruri explained that it was necessary and asked if he knew the reason why her lady holds the imposing title of Duchess. Ferda confirmed, "The manifestation of darkness, the source of dark energy that helped give rise to the king of beasts, the black dragon Godwin. The one who put an end to that black dragon's existence was Valdrova." Hearing this, Ruri nodded. Exactly. For that feat, the Empire granted her the title of Duchess and this territory. Currently, the most important task for Lady Valdrova is the containment of the creatures. Therefore, as her companion, you must administer the territory and the lords of the eastern border. In simple terms, my lady takes care of external affairs and you take care of internal management. Ferda asks if that means he will be in charge of the household. He realizes she is testing his leadership capacity and accepts the challenge of presenting himself before all the lords. Back at the meeting, Ferda formally introduces himself as the Duchess's future companion and takes the floor before the council. Without showing any hesitation, he stares at everyone with firmness and asks directly how they would like to be treated by him. The direct question catches the lords by surprise, making them immediately realize that the young man will not be an easy target to dominate. The moment they speak, the hierarchy will be defined. The old count then cleverly speaks up. We are merely lords who reside under the Duchess's light. Naturally, we ought to show respect to her future companion. However, the lords gathered here swore loyalty to the Empire long before you were born. Therefore, shouldn't you, as her companion, extend proper courtesy to us? This made the other nobles smile mockingly. However, Ferda replies coldly, "Is that your final answer? Should I speak to you with deference or treat you as subordinates? Just answer that question." Pressed by Ferda's attitude, the old count swallows hard and apprehensively yields, accepting that it is the fiancé's right to speak to them as equals. Ferda then declares, "As you all know, even if I become her companion, there is little I will change directly. Your territories are in your hands, so continue to administer them as you see fit, whether you govern with wisdom or exploit your own people." Before he finishes speaking, a lord stands up slamming his hand on the table and rages, asking if the young man is implying that they take advantage of their own people. Ferda raises his hand and cinematically apologizes, claiming it was merely a small slip of the tongue. The irritated man provokes him, saying that now he clearly understands the reason why the young man was dismissed by his own family. You were set aside by a family of knights, and now you try to play the mage. You had better show some respect to your superiors, you first circle arcanist. You are only here because of your status with the Duchess. What makes you any better than me, a mage of the fourth circle? Ferda merely mutters with calm. Fourth circle, is it? Reasonable. This left the man absolutely furious. Inside, he seethed with indignation, for a fourth circle mage is highly respected wherever he goes. An arcanist's level is determined solely by their skill, and a mere practitioner of the first circle dares to show disrespect. He then begins to gather his magic energy to teach the young man a lesson in manners. In the face of initiating hostility, Ferda extends his hand with absolute calm and says he has an interesting proposal that might be to his opponent's liking. He suggests that, to test the skills of a simple first circle, the two of them hold a duel right there to settle the matter. The scene shifts to the combat arena, where the nobles comment that the outcome of a confrontation between the first and fourth circle is already more than obvious. Meanwhile, in silence, Ruri merely watches the situation, while other lords question whether Thessalos will actually go easy on Ferda. As soon as the two opponents assume their combat positions before the entire audience, Ferda directly asks which spell his opponent intends to use. Thessalos gets irritated by the direct question and complains furiously about the young man's tremendous lack of composure for demanding such information before the fight. Smiling mockingly, he provokes him by saying the young man must be trembling with fear, offering a chance for him to give up immediately. Right then and there, Thessalos announces with great fanfare that he will use the powerful fourth circle spell called Arcane Explosion. The spectators panic upon hearing the name of the devastating technique and whisper apprehensively, wondering if Ferda will even manage to walk away in one piece. Ferda remains unwavering and says he will also reveal his technique, admitting that the only spell he knows how to use is Mana Shot. His opponent laughs upon hearing about such a basic ability, but Ferda responds with absolute confidence that he has no intention whatsoever of losing. He makes a slight gesture with his fingers and calmly comments that, despite everything, he has plenty of knowledge at his disposal. Infuriated by such audacity coming from a first circle practitioner, Thessalos rages and begins to concentrate all his magical power. With that, an enormous gleaming transmutation circle forms behind him, ready to unleash his main attack. Ferda notices that his rival is destabilizing his own emotions to inflate his power, recognizing him as another red circle user. Without wasting any more time, Ferda begins to form simple red magic projectiles. It is the same element that Thessalos uses, but Ferda's energy is fueled by a completely different feeling. Thessalos is surprised by this. Ferda calmly mutters that the confrontation is already over and launches his projectiles toward him. Thessalos quickly conjures a protective shield. However, the projectiles pass right by him and hit the incomplete magic circle behind him. Thessalos finally realizes that he was not the target from the start, going into shock as he sees his own magic circuit being disrupted. In absolute astonishment, he asks himself if that young man truly belongs to the first circle, as not even he himself could accomplish such a feat. Right after, a final projectile hits his hand, ending the duel. Now kneeling on the ground, Thessalos cannot believe his defeat. Standing victorious before him, Ferda asks if he surrenders. Thessalos hesitates, but desiring to become stronger and willing to do whatever it takes to achieve that evolution, he finally admits defeat. The spectators stand jaw-dropped upon seeing a fourth circle mage lose to a first circle practitioner. A noble whispers in secret that perhaps the dragon's maid intervened covertly. However, Ruri warns him severely, "If you cannot trust your own eyes, perhaps it is best you no longer need them to see." The noble immediately cringes before the firmness of her response. Meanwhile, Thessalos holds Ferda's hand and begins to praise him, saying he never expected to encounter someone of that caliber, and that the world is vast indeed. Ferda replies calmly, "Your magic was also excellent. If you had been just a little faster, I would have been in a tough spot. Seeing the strength of the East puts my mind at ease." Thessalos laughs softly, saying, "I am honored by your compliment. My transfer from the capital wasn't all bad. It is a true honor to meet the sovereign's companion." Upon hearing that he had been transferred from the capital, Ferda asks his name out of curiosity. The man introduces himself as Thessalos Vulture. Hearing that name, a click resonates in Ferda's memory, and he mutters thoughtfully that he finally remembers who he is. Thessalos is surprised that he knows him. With an intense look, Ferda reveals to Thessalos that he had once been of great relevance to him. The man is completely confused by the revelation, asking when they could have ever met. But before he could say anything else, Ferda gently touches the center of the man's forehead with his fingertip and uses a precise mana shot, neutralizing the man definitively. The watching nobles freeze in terror, mouths open before the shocking scene. Thessalos collapses unconscious onto the arena floor while Ferda observes him from above with complete coldness. He mutters to himself that this was the exact reason he could not let him move forward, for in the future, that man would end up bringing immense sorrow to his companion. Meanwhile, the nobles remain paralyzed, staring at Thessalos' inert body. They cannot believe that he disqualified a noble in that manner. Then they look at each other with fear, knowing that the duel was already over. And even so, Ferda put an end to Thessalos. This means he could do the same to them. But who would dare to oppose him? Ferda turns around calmly and walks toward them, saying, "Why are you all so tense? Is it because of Thessalos Vulture? Do not worry about it. He deserved that sentence." Leaving him to move forward would have only brought grief to the sovereign. Count Ulvera grows confused as to how Thessalos would do such a thing, arguing that this was the first time Ferda had met him. However, Ferda replies, "Sovereign Valdrova wishes only for people to be able to live in peace. A merciful sovereign who, despite being a dragon, fights for humanity." Thessalos Vulture went directly against that wish, although it is difficult to prove this to you now, as it is something that would happen in the distant future. The nobles are bewildered by that man for putting an end to someone's trajectory based on what he would do in the future. Ferda simply reassures the rest of them, saying that he does not care about the lot of them. Later, as the carriage travels at high speed along the dirt road, its wheels constantly hit rocks, making the vehicle shake throughout the entire journey. Inside, Ferda curls his body up and holds his head in extreme frustration, letting out a groan of pure discomfort. He complains of severe dizziness, feeling his mind spinning and feeling extremely nauseous. He reflects that his magic energy was completely exhausted after executing that precise mana shot against his opponent. To make matters worse, he suffers from the motion sickness caused by the turbulent route. He misses modern transportation, but it's a pity it hasn't been invented yet. Meanwhile, Ruri sarcastically comments with a gleam in her eye that he was brilliant to eliminate the Duchess's most loyal lord right on their first meeting. Ferda asks if she is talking about Thessalos, and the servant confirms that, despite appearances, he was indeed very loyal to his mistress. Ferda gets a bit apprehensive upon learning this and decides to ask to what extent the Lord was truly an honest man. Ruri explains that he was reasonably upright and took only enough. On the eastern border, that kind of mediocrity is considered the highest standard, given that the other lords are far too busy lining their own pockets, even on the front lines where people are in danger. Ferda realizes that the lords of that region are a complete mess. He then tells her that the engagement ceremony will proceed as planned, as he had a perfectly valid reason to restrain Thessalos Vulture. Ferda leans back in his seat, deep in thought, and stares at the bag Ruri carries during the journey. If Ferda's memory serves him right, Thessalos was committing a severe violation of the realm's rules at that very moment. Later, upon arriving at Thessalos' castle, the head servant bows respectfully and welcomes the Duchess's envoys. The butler informs them that the master is away, but Ferda indifferently replies that the lord, in fact, will not be returning anymore. Without wasting time, Ruri hands the heavy bag directly into the arms of the confused butler, telling him to hold onto it for now. She casually orders him to display the contents of the bag in a highly visible spot at the castle gates. The butler opens the wrapping and enters a state of absolute panic as he recognizes with horror whom the item kept inside belonged to. Ignoring the servant's reactions, Ferda and Ruri breach Thessalos' luxurious quarters in search of secret clues. Ruri warns that he needs to find evidence of misconduct, but Ferda reminds her that she herself helped him by collecting the evidence from the duel site. She threatens to undo the deal and cancel the engagement, but Ferda warns that he has just found a secret passage beneath the bed. He runs his hands over the wooden floor, searching for some hidden mechanism capable of opening the secret entrance. Seeing that he is taking too long, Ruri approaches with authority and tells him to move away from there immediately. She raises her fist and shatters the structure of the secret passage, creating a perfect access way. Unconcerned, she announces that the entrance is now open for them to enter. The two begin to descend step by step down a dark, cold stone staircase leading directly underground. Both cover their noses, bothered by the unbearable odor of decay that pervades the entire subterranean environment. They come across a secret laboratory filled with traces of illegal experiments involving humans and creatures. Those pieces of evidence of life profanation and research on creatures clearly indicate the presence of a practitioner of forbidden arts, those who abandon their moral conduct in pursuit of dark power. Among them, Thessalos Vulture was a dark arcanist. Ruri observes the traces, noting that they belong to soldiers from that very territory. It appears that parts of the guards and creatures were artificially combined. Ruri is overcome with deep indignation upon realizing that that individual practically asked to be restrained by them. She concludes with severity that certain men cannot be trusted, but admits that his betrayal fully justifies Ferda's actions. However, she looks suspiciously at Ferda and asks how he already knew about the existence of a place as secret as that one. Without answering, Ferda focuses his attention on some documents and triumphantly whispers that he has finally found what he was looking for. The manuscript reveals Thessalos' nameless masterpiece, the method for the infinite cultivation of mana. In his past life, Thessalos had explained that creatures constantly produce mana inside their bodies. However, this energy is too pure and unstable to be used directly. But if they could artificially replicate this biological capacity for continuous mana generation, it would be possible to extract pure energy indefinitely, completely overcoming all limits imposed by magic circles. Ferda had congratulated the incredible achievement and asked what he planned to do with it. Thessalos laughed maliciously, revealing that he planned to use an army under his control to defeat the nobles who had transferred him to the Dragonlands, celebrating that he would soon become an archmage. Remembering all of this, Ferda reflects that he had used this very same valuable technique to settle his own score in the past. Back then, Ferda surpassed his former ally and took the research for himself. Now, in the present, the manuscript has fallen into his hands once again. The mana cultivation method allowed his past self to reach the 8th circle faster than anyone else. If Ferda studies this now, he will be able to reach the 8th circle much faster. Ruri awakens him from his thoughts, saying, "Seeing you covet such a thing, you really are a human after all. The research is complete and the author is no longer here. No one would ever know if you kept it for yourself. It is the ultimate chance to become stronger that humans so desire." Ruri sarcastically congratulates him, but, completely surprising the servant, Ferda extends the manuscript toward her and firmly refuses the idea of keeping the document. He hands the sheets into her hands and orders her to destroy absolutely everything in the laboratory. Ruri is in shock and asks if he is serious, unable to understand how an arcanist would not covet such knowledge. He admits that the research could revolutionize the art of magic, but questions what good any of it would be. In the end, Ferda prefers to eliminate the technique at its root, rather than allow himself to be seduced by power and end up bringing sorrow to the sovereign in the future. He looks into Ruri's eyes and asks firmly if she can incinerate all of it. Ruri stares at the valuable documents in silence for a brief moment, and decisively replies that the request will be no trouble at all to fulfill. Quickly, intense blue flames begin to sprout from her hand, consuming the forbidden paper immediately. The fire spreads furiously throughout the entire place, reducing every piece of research and trace of the experiments to ashes. Seeing that Ferda reflects in silence, all magic reflects the emotions of the one who casts it, and the very essence of the practitioner becomes marked by that magic. Just as Thessalos held a grudge against the Empire, his magic harbored that feeling, and the dark energy ended up consuming him. Thessalos was also the bearer of a red circle, harboring a resentment and an inferiority complex no smaller than those of my former self. A man who shared my fury and my grudge. If I inherit his magic, I will once again be consumed by uncontrollable emotions. Therefore, I must leave it behind, along with my former self, who had to force himself to hold on to resentment just to survive. Holding his chest, Ferda watches the magnificent blue flames and comments that everything is burning very well. Ruri observes him, finding him an unpredictable and peculiar fellow, a truly exotic human to keep by her mistress's side. However, she sighs and says that it is better to leave that stuffy place, as it would be unpleasant to carry a strong odor before the engagement ceremony with her mistress. Finally, the day of the engagement ceremony arrived. Inside Duchess Valdrova's castle, Ruri and Ferda walked toward the event's venue. Ruri asked if he had finished writing the vows for the ceremony. Dressed in an elegant, noble suit, Ferda raised the written document and confidently affirmed that he had. However, he commented that he found it quite romantic that the sovereign was holding a ceremony where both partners wrote vows in their own hand for each other. Ruri let out a sigh, saying that that was merely the formal way of putting things, lamenting that the symbol of power was holding her ceremony in such a private and simple location. Seeing her concern, Ferda thought to himself, Ruri seems apprehensive. Even if she isn't particularly enthusiastic about this engagement, she still wants Valdrova to be happy. It is a bit sad to see her deal with such conflicting feelings. Noticing that he was staring at her, Ruri crossed her arms and questioned him sharply, warning him not to wrinkle the formal attire she had worked so hard to adjust. Ferda remained silent, deciding to let her vent. Next, he asked, "Come to think of it, things have been calm since the last meeting. What is the current situation in the territory?" Starting with the lords, none of them seemed capable of managing the front lines. Ruri replied that his judgment was correct. She explained that things were manageable in the beginning when the lords had autonomy but with no one to watch over them. They all became busy lining their own pockets. They were suppressing the citizens' complaints by force, so much so that a massive revolt could break out at any moment. Hearing this, Ferda replied that the situation was serious. But wouldn't this be resolved if the sovereign intervened personally? With just a single word from her, everyone would be bowing and begging for forgiveness. Standing next to the entrance to Valdrova's isolation chamber, Ruri replied with hesitation that he would soon understand why she refused to interfere. Ferda was left confused by the vague statement. Upon entering, Ruri lit countless candles. In the center of the room rested the ceremonial drink that the couple was supposed to consume to seal their union. Ruri instructed Ferda to wait outside before slightly opening the inner gate and stepping inside. The moment she did so, Ferda felt felt an overwhelming pressure. It seemed as though the air escaping through that passage was enough to weigh down his entire body. When Valdrova emerged in her dragon form, extending only one of her claws beyond the door, her imposing aura made Ferda question whether someone like him was truly worthy of standing before her. Standing in the center, Ruri commenced the ceremony. Today, mortality and immortality become one, forging a golden bond that neither the authority of the heavens nor the passage of time can break. The mortal shall become one by facing the unknown and dispelling fear. As Ruri poured the ritual drink into the goblet, Ferda drank it firmly. Instantly, he felt different. Realizing that it was no ordinary liquor, the dragon's overwhelming presence began to gradually soften under its effects. Ruri poured another dose and continued, "The immortal shall become one." Attempting to ward off the futility of an endless stream, Valdrova extended her trembling claws and tried to lift the goblet, but, to everyone's surprise, ended up accidentally dropping the vessel, spilling the drink everywhere. Ruri remained in silence for a moment before deciding to restart the ceremony from scratch. Sometime later, Ferda was feeling extremely dizzy. There had been so many attempts that he had already lost count, wondering how many more times he would have to keep drinking. It was the first time in his life that he had gone through something like this, but that was already going too far. At that rate, he really would end up in a difficult situation. Meanwhile, Valdrova dropped the goblet once again. This time, Ruri finally lost her patience. She asked Ferda for a moment's leave before going into the inner chamber to have a direct conversation with her mistress. Ferda jumped in surprise when Ruri's heated questions echoed throughout the entire room. "What do you think you are doing, my lady? You were the one who insisted so much on uniting with a mortal in the first place. And what did this loyal servant do? I endured it all. But hiding away while your fiancé is sitting right out there? How does that reflect on your partner's image? Go out there with pride and greet your fiancé, and if you spill the engagement wine one more time, I won't let it slide." A moment later, Ruri finally exited Valdrova's quarters and found Ferda lying on the floor, still recovering from the impact of that imposing voice. Completely steady, she asked if he had heard what she said just a moment ago. Ferda gave a weak nod, saying that that tone of voice felt like the force of an elemental roar. Ruri laughed awkwardly, saying there was no other choice if they wanted the ceremony to move forward smoothly since her mistress was afraid of dealing with humans. This caught Ferda off guard. Ruri explained that Lady Valdrova was reluctant to interact with ordinary people, and that was precisely why she never left her sanctuary unless she was containing creatures. Ferda could hardly believe that the great Valdrova had such hesitation. In any case, he asked when they should continue the ceremony. At that exact moment, Valdrova opened the door slightly and finally walked toward the ceremonial table in her human form. However, she was wearing full body armor for her own engagement. Upon sitting down in front of Ferda, he felt a slight disappointment that she had covered her face. After all, he had heard that a dragon's human form was of striking beauty, but instead she looked like someone ready to march straight onto the battlefield. Ruri resumed the engagement ceremony. "The mortal shall become one by facing the unknown and dispelling fear. The immortal shall become one by erasing the futility of an infinite stream." As Ruri finished pouring the ritualistic drink, Ferda watched closely as Valdrova raised her hands to her helmet. She partially removed it, revealing her soft lips while her silky hair flowed naturally. Even with only half of her face visible, Ferda was completely dazzled by her gracefulness. She raised the goblet with elegance and drank all of its contents. Upon finishing, she let out a gentle sigh. Ferda found himself totally captivated by her. He wondered if he had drunk too much of the ceremonial wine, as the instinctive apprehension he had felt before had vanished completely. He was amazed by the fact that she had gone through all that effort for an ordinary human like him. Ruri then moved on to the next phase of the ceremony, in which each of them would recite the vows they had prepared. Ferda pulled out his words from inside his noble suit. He thought that the message he had written in the past might sound meaningless now that he had returned in time. Anchored in his determination, he decided to read it out loud. Looking directly into his future wife's eyes, he began to recite, "You do not know me well, but I know you. You gave me your very essence, and through it, I came to understand everything about you. I saw you being wronged and unjustly accused countless times, yet despite everything, I also saw you fulfill your duties with unwavering dignity. You welcomed even those who rejected you without cause, and your refusal to abandon what you wish to protect was what set me back on the right path. Therefore, I swear here and now, just as you offered your heart, this time I offer mine to you, my sovereign, my everything. As soon as Ferda finished reciting his vows, he added that he had one more thing to say that was not written on the paper. It is an absolute honor to be engaged to a woman as stunning as you. Those unexpected words caught Valdrova completely by surprise. Ruri then instructed her mistress to recite the vows she herself had prepared. However, the Duchess did not answer. Instead, she abruptly stood up. Without saying a single word, she turned around, walked back to her room, and shut the door behind her, leaving both Ferda and Ruri completely confused. To Ferda's surprise, however, Ruri looked beaming. She immediately ordered him to leave, declaring that the engagement ceremony had been successfully concluded. Ferda remained silent. Ruri called his name once more. After a brief pause, he suddenly asked if there would be any problem with him staying in isolation for about 3 days. Leaving the servant surprised by the unexpected request, she assumed he was heartbroken. Ruri then entered Valdrova's quarters, showering praise on her mistress's attitude. "As expected of my lady, dealing such an impressive blow to that cheeky fellow. You truly possess the noble elegance of a dragon. You really had a plan from the start, my lady. Even I was completely fooled by this surprise tactic. With this, control of the situation remains entirely in your hands." However, her mistress remained in absolute silence. Documents and papers were scattered all over the room, as if they had been thrown everywhere. Completely confused, Ruri asked if that had not been her intention. Wasn't this engagement ceremony something my lady was looking forward to with so much enthusiasm? We then see Valdrova in her dragon form, covering her face with both claws out of pure embarrassment, after having completely overturned her own room from being so shy and flustered by the compliments.